support, and they're susceptible to the same kinds of pressure that people elsewhere are. Something else that I think has happened to science is that it has become a job. A lot of people in the past, people went into science because of a passion for science. That's no longer the case. A lot of people choose science. They might consider a career in science or a career as in marketing, and they might have an ability to do either, and they'll just choose the one that seems to be better paying, or that might give them other perks that they're interested in. But the passion for science might not be the big driver the way it would have been, say, 50 years ago. So I think there are a lot of reasons that scientists behave the way they do.
Do you think it's possible in my lifetime for science to be funded outside of governments?
Well, not likely, but I think that would be wonderful if it were the case. I think it would end up with a democratization of science, and we would have then more competition in the world of ideas, and I think we would have more robust results.
See, I think we need a NASA-type paradigm, and I don't mean NASA, the organization, but a NASA-like occasion in business that is not run by governments and not answerable to governments, that needs to be set up to make sure that science is and will be free and clear to do its job.
One mechanism by which science can be made independent is to allow individual taxpayers to direct the research funds to any area that they choose. So if there were 300 million choosers of an area for science, rather than ultimately a few government-controlled funding organizations, I think we'd see a lot of very interesting results.
I don't think we're that far from it. I think it's a question of a few people getting together and deciding that that's how it's going to be. Think about that. A lot has been done when two people agree. Let's talk about CO2. This is one of the most frightening parts of the entire debate. I grew up thinking that CO2 was a pollutant. I was taught that for years and years and years. Of course, I would never know that it wasn't, that it was food for plants and all of human life and animals and nature. But apparently, it doesn't stay in the atmosphere for 50, 100, and 200 years. Talk about it.
Well, there are lots of different estimates of the qualities of CO2. This is another area where the science is not settled. But what you said about CO2 being nature's fertilizer is something that people really need to understand. Until not that long ago, CO2 was universally seen as beneficial, and it's really since the UN became potent, and the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change started producing its reports, that the view of CO2 started to change. My organization has been opposed to dirty fuels for a long time. So, for example, we have been opposed to coal because of the many pollutants inside coal. Coal has NOx and SOx and mercury. These are problems that need to be targeted. And, in fact, society has targeted them, and we've had very good results from the targeting. Coal has become incredibly clean over the decades. It's nothing like what it was a generation ago. Clean coal now is something that I think is desirable. But what we've started to do is to also target CO2, which is a component. The carbon is a component of coal, which is actually beneficial. It's nature's fertilizer. It helps plants grow. Until a few decades ago, we didn't have a good handle on whether the planet was becoming greener or not. And then with satellite technology, we started measuring the amount of biota on Earth. And what the satellite data here shows is that the planet has become steadily greener over the last 20 years. And one reason for that is the extra CO2 that's been put into the atmosphere. It has promoted plant growth. Another reason for the planet becoming greener has been the warmth that we've seen for much of the last half century. And the warmth also promotes plant growth. It allows the tree line to go further north. It's beneficial for greenery.
We exhale CO2, don't we?
Yes, we do.
And in effect, we're in a carbon biosphere. In your book, it talked about how the ocean has 50 times more CO2 than the atmosphere. So why is the EPA demonizing carbon?
Well, this is perhaps the only tool that the U.S. administration has to control CO2. I believe that a cap-and-trade bill can no longer pass because the science has now gone overwhelmingly to establishing that there is no credible risk of catastrophe that comes of CO2. So there isn't going to be legislation. So the U.S. administration, which wants to do something about greenhouse gases, will have to use the EPA to do it, and that's the only tool it likely will have. So that's the only tool it's going to be using.
Can we trust the EPA today?
This is such a politicized area that I would say no. I certainly would not trust it.
Professor Tom Siegelstad talked about CO2, and he talked about how the models related to CO2, that there's a missing 3 gigatons of carbon not explained by the model. Can you explain this?
It's actually quite a convoluted explanation, but basically the models can't account for a huge amount of CO2, and there are various theories about where it could possibly be. And Siegelstad has the answer, is that it's not missing, it's simply in the ocean. There's always been a balance between the CO2 in the ocean and the CO2 in the atmosphere. It's been regulated naturally since time immemorial, and that explains it.
Dr. Sami Solansky, I looked up on Wikipedia. He was one of the people that you interviewed at the Max Planck Institute for Solar Systems Research in Germany. Can you say something about him, and then I want to talk to you about what I found on Wikipedia.
Well, he's actually interesting in several ways. He, when I interviewed scientists, many of them were, at least, especially at the beginning of my of writing my newspaper columns, which ultimately became my book. Many scientists were reluctant to be interviewed initially, and many refused to be interviewed. Others didn't want me to even use their published information in my book. And
that ought to tell you something right there. Why a climate of fear like this? There shouldn't be. There should be excitement to share and synthesize and cross-pollinate information and findings, correct?
There should be, but they also know that that their funding depends on having the right results and the right interpretation from their data, the acceptable interpretation from their data.